We now continue with Chapter 2 of Nick Carter's keynote address at UU University 2008. In the first chapter, Nick introduced the idea of the Borderlands. In this chapter, Nick talks about understanding ourselves. We hope you enjoy his insights.
So our first, I want to frame as three categories of skills. And the first, I'm calling nosotros, ourselves. We have to start with ourselves. We're committed to trying to get our own act together so that we can begin to give ourselves away in ways that matter. That really is our mission. And so starting with ourselves is the first step. I'm a person who believes in the Gospels and those writings and testimonies that testify to the good news and a great truth. And one of my most favorite Gospels is the Gospel according to Alice. You all know the Gospel according to Alice? That is Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. This is a Gospel. It frames for us the first question and the first skill. The first skill, even as Bill Sinkford intimated in his talk, is the question of identity. After chasing the scurrying white rabbit down the hole and experiencing a bizarre series of changes, the young Alice finds herself in a topsy-turvy world where she's just a few inches tall and in a garden. And in front of her is a huge mushroom. And as she peeks up over the edge of that mushroom, there's a big blue caterpillar there smoking a hookah pipe. And he blows smoke in her face, and he says to her, "Who are you?" And Alice, who's been through quite a lot, says, "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't rightly know." She says, "I knew who I was this morning, but I've changed so much since then, you see, I don't really know who I am." In a world convulsing with change and with countless core assumptions of our society torn from their moorings, Alice's encounter with a caterpillar may be one of the leading metaphors of this age. In the Borderlands, we are all like Alice. None of our reference points are the same, and we are easily confused. We hunger for definition and things upon which we can rely, but it all eludes us. Here's the first skill. To be prepared for ministry in the Borderlands, we must first be self-differentiated and grounded. Grounded enough to answer the fundamental question of identity. Who are you? If we can't answer that question, we won't be of use to anybody in the Borderlands. Cherishing our tradition and being clear about what we believe is a critical part of getting our act together. It's okay if you're still trying to figure things out, but the less clear that you are about what you believe, the harder it will be for someone else to relate to you, especially in an interreligious context. Another identity pitfall is when folks try to minimize the difference and homogenize everything. Now, yes, it's true that we can begin simply getting to know each other, and we can begin to break down some levels of ignorance. But it doesn't erase the differences. And those who seek to try and erase the differences, who try and homogenize everything, cause serious trouble. They cause serious trouble. I like to call it sloppy agape. It's the favored theology of all the saccharine folks who try to make nice. Generally, those are the people who have the weakest self-identity, who have to start with making nice. This approach quickly is exposed as naive and having little character or backbone, and ultimately a waste of the other person's time. Research has shown that while there are initial benefits in overcoming prejudice and expanding tolerance by simply putting people of different races and religious backgrounds together, and thereby beginning to overcome ignorance, it doesn't result in mutual respect. In fact, without some specific skills tension and discrimination may actually increase, not decrease. If we don't know who we are and what we believe, we really have no basis for dialogue or constructive engagements. One of the biggest complaints I hear from Jews and Muslims about other faiths, especially Christians, is that not only do we not know the sacred texts of these other faiths, we don't know our own sacred texts and tradition. And in fact, they know our sacred texts better than we do. And this utter lack of discipline about matters of faith undermines any genuine dialogue. We show ourselves out to be pretenders and fakers. It suggests to the other that we're not serious. If we are casual about our faith, we won't be taken seriously by people of other faiths. It's that simple. We have to have our act together. Now, one note. I don't know about you, but I've noticed that it's usually the insecure people who are most obsessed with conformity, which is a great compliment to UUs. You folks don't do conformity at all. So you must be the most secure people on the planet. Conformity is safer. It's less threatening. If in our insecurity we're always trying to downplay differences, we rob ourselves of any legitimate basis for recognizing genuine convergence or honest divergence in our encounters with others. The higher the stakes, the more critical this is. Authenticity is critical to building trust. You know this. You've experienced it. When you feel that somebody's faking it, right, it eats away in your confidence in dealing with them. Gandhi called upon us to speak the truth without fear and without exception. And Howard Thurman, that great black preacher, rightly called this unwavering sincerity. Biblical sincerity, authenticity, integrity is regularly contrasted with hypocrisy, one of the biggest barriers to border crossing. When I am in a situation filled with ambiguity and little is sure, and as it often is for an immigrant or a stranger, I am in desperate need of things that I know are well-grounded in people I can trust. Trust grows from knowledge, fear from the lack of it. If you don't know who you are, how am I, the stranger, to know you or to trust you? The next thing I want to talk about is modesty, second skill. I thought about calling this humility because modesty is loaded with a lot of cultural stuff, but I decided maybe just to be provocative that I'd keep and call it modesty. We'll see. Maybe you disagree with me. There's a great story that's told about Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill was one who loved to do a lot of homework before he met people. One of his aides came in to announce that a very important person was coming in to see him, and his aide said, "This is a very modest man, Mr. Churchill." And Churchill said, "He has a lot to be modest about." Modesty and its twin sister, humility, are perhaps the qualities most often missing in our culture today. Having thoroughly rejected the Puritans, prudery, uptightness, and a host of other societal ills that repressed and oppressed millions, we have a new cultural reality that may be the Scylla to this old Charybdis. Everything we do now is inflated, brash, supersized, and in your face. Being differential is a lost skill, and our tolerance for it has skyrocketed. You know, we used to have one definition of modesty, but it's long gone. It's long gone. The bad girls have replaced the good girls. Britney Spears and Lindsay Lohan and Paris Hilton are now prime examples in our society. Modesty and humility have their roots in respect for ourselves and respect for others. But somewhere in the last generation, Perhaps in the midst of our obsession with building up our flagging self-esteem and reclaiming our sexuality, we've managed to lose our respect and our respect for each other and our respect for our environment. That self-esteem has become overinflated and herniated into insolence and a lack of respect. In 1965, Otis Redding penned one of the great songs of that decade, and 2 years later, Aretha Franklin made it a big hit. How many of you can sing it? Yes, PCT, right. R-E-S-P-C-T, right. 40 years later, the closest we get to respect is when we talk about being dissed or disrespected. But this is an inverted concept that places too much emphasis on unmerited entitlement and a pretentious reaction to perceived put-downs. It's not a value that's grounded in a true sense of what deserves to be honored and respected. To be humble is to be unpretentious. It's also a matter of recognizing that we've crossed a border into a territory or a space that doesn't belong to us, that we might actually offend somebody. Mutual respect and understanding between members of different religions is the first step on the road to ending hatred. Many faiths consider desecration of any holy book a personal insult, but few of us are generally offended when it happens to somebody else's faith. The desecration of the Quran or the Torah or the Bible or any religious slight should be offensive to all of us, but we react differently. In our postmodern obsession with undermining hierarchy and trying to establish an egalitarian world, we no longer recognize the point at which familiarity disrespects privacy, casualness disrespects seriousness, and the demand for accessibility disrespects deference. To be a border crosser doesn't mean that we erase borders or pretend that they don't exist. On the contrary, those who are the most effective are keenly aware of when they're crossing a boundary. Whether it's Britney Spears or George Bush, our age is one that is clumsily and abusively blundering back and forth across boundaries. When humility is lost, a presumptive arrogance, or even its absence, the absence of arrogance is clumsiness, appears. The consequences of arrogance become painful, sad realities when our beliefs encounter other beliefs, particularly when they're generated out of blind arrogance, or that unique phenomenon of dominant cultures and belief systems. The subtle difference between certainty and certitude is lost on us. One is absolutely sure, the other is assured enough, but humble enough to allow that there might be a different opinion. Consider how many people feel like they have a certain corner on the truth which allows no other insights to the truth. By the way, this reality is as true of UUs as it is of Baptists, as it is of Muslim radicals. We know that faith is a quest for certitude, particularly amongst marginalized people who are driven to seek out still points in the storms that engulf them. To be clear, this idea of humility is not a partner of self-depreciation, as folks like Ayn Rand and Nietzsche are so eager to try and prove. To respect you, I don't have to disrespect myself. Every major religion on the planet has a critical place for humility in its belief system. In Christianity, blessed are the meek. But you could teach me, and others can, about the same lessons in a whole host of other faith traditions that stress humility. Mahatma Gandhi once said that you can't sustain truth without humility, because the absence of humility causes truth to become an arrogant caricature of itself. For Jews, the covering of the head is a sign of respect. That's why the faithful are forbidden to mention God's name with one's head uncovered. Indeed, Jewish law says that a pious person must keep their head covered at all times. Wearing a kippah has become the unmistakable mark of a religious Jew. This act is a constant reminder that there is a higher power than human reason or understanding. And even though human reason sets us apart from the rest of creation, the Torah nevertheless proclaims that this is not humanity's most valuable capacity. And Aristotle notwithstanding, reason is not what puts us in the realm of angels. For Jews, the highest human power is the recognition of the Creator as the being who completely transcends reason, and before whom Jews are duty-bound to make their reason subservient and to humble themselves in an act of modesty. Next, I'd like to talk about maturity. I've got a couple more things and we'll quit for the day. Frankly, some people are not ready for border crossings. That's the truth. We get a new idea and we're all ready to get on board, but the truth is, some of us, we're not ready. And it's these folks who, despite their eagerness, end up causing more harm than if they had never bothered to wade into the borderlands in the first place. Some people don't have the strength of self, some don't have the modesty, but there's also an element of maturity that I think is essential. This is serious stuff, folks. It is work that demands a keen sense of responsibility, and it's a virtue that we've let atrophy. It's a failing that is old as humanity itself. The prophets of ancient Israel preached again and again to a self-absorbed people. You are chosen not for special privilege, but for special responsibility. You are chosen not for special privilege, but for special responsibility. For those of you who are not Hebrew Scripture aficionados, if you learn that one lesson, you've learned about 30% of the major lessons that the Hebrew Scriptures want to teach. You are not chosen for special privilege. You are chosen for special responsibility. We live in a culture where millions have a strong sense of entitlement. It's all about me, rather than a sense of responsibility, of what I owe you. One of the central preconditions for an interreligious dialogue is the acceptance of diverse movements and perspectives within one's own community and faith. As long as inquisitorial means are used against those within our own family, the spiritual maturity required for dialogue with others is probably not there. The ability to have an open and sincere dialogue with critical factions within one's own family and among the various denominations of one's larger community is a prime necessity for creating an atmosphere of understanding. It's the ground we must walk on before we dare to take any steps outside. What makes us think that if we are always at odds with those in our own congregation, people that we already have an affinity with, that we will be an effective ambassador to cross borders into other communities, a situation with much higher stakes? Tend to your own knitting. Take on the maturity of the question of where I am before I take on the mission of going elsewhere. Maturity can give us valuable insights that we're blind to otherwise. The recognition that I may not be the one for this task is an important one. Despite my enthusiasms and my good intentions, maybe I shouldn't go. Maybe I shouldn't go. Maybe somebody else would be better, and my role is to help discern and to support that other person. You want an example? Consider Moses. You remember it was Moses that led the people out of Egypt and helped them form their identity as a people. But he wasn't able to cross the border into the promised land. It's a job that fell to Joshua. Those who are in positions of leadership often hang on to their role of power longer than they should without realizing that their powerfulness can disempower others who might actually be more capable of the task. You know, there is no rule that says because you are the chairperson that you actually have to run the meeting. Your job is to see that the meeting is run well. And maybe you're a lousy meeting runner. And maturity says, call upon the person who is good at this. I have served my group better by doing that and showing that maturity than identifying myself with the power. Let the power go. Take on the responsibility. I'll finish this point with the last one. Some of you may know the story, the image of the geese and how they fly. But we all need to tell this story time and time again. The geese fly in a V, not because they like it, but because it makes a lot of sense. It has to do with wind drag. The lead goose goes out front and takes on 70% of the wind drag, while the others fly behind. And you notice that they honk. That honking is to encourage the lead goose. And so the lead goose flies as long and hard as she can until she's tired. And then she falls back in line, and one of the other geese takes over. And that former lead goose just honks as loud as she can for whoever's taken over the responsibility. It's one of our best models of leadership, of mature leadership.
This concludes Chapter 2 of Nick's remarks. We now have 5 discussion questions. The first is, what defines you as a person of faith, a Unitarian Universalist? What are the fundamental reference points of your identity? Take about 10 minutes to discuss the question. Press play to move to the next question.